Stanford University.
Let's get going again this evening. Welcome again to our Cars Past, Present, and Future. This evening we have Reilly Brennan, who's, as it says here on his opening slide, Reilly is with the Revs program at Stanford. In fact, he's our kind of Master of Ceremonies, Executive Director. He keeps us all holding together, keeping going in the right direction, and motoring along. So Reilly's come along tonight to share a new kind of angle on things with you, and I'm sure you're going to find his approach, his angle, intriguing and informative, and all the rest, all the things it should be. Again, I'm not going to overdo the introduction. We'll be having some questions and discussion after his presentation, and of course, through all of this, you'll get to know Reilly a lot better. Okay, Reilly, over to you.
Thank you, everyone, and thank you to Michael for having me here in the class. There's a lot of familiar faces here in the audience, and it's great to be here. I'm new to California. My wife and I moved here about a year and a half ago, and we moved to San Francisco. And one of the things that you pick up on coming from Detroit, which is where we're from, is that there seems to be innovation in the air. There seems to be something about the Bay Area right now that's really special. And I've often wondered, is it special and distinct, or is it special but possibly repeating some other trends or cycles we've seen before? And when we moved here, I guess the two people who I was hoping to bump into at a coffee shop were these two guys, Steve Wozniak and Steve Jobs. And these are two people, I think, who have done more to innovate in the Bay Area than most people. And I often wonder, is innovation something that just sort of happened for them? Is it something that they were able to do to just pull ideas out of their brain and make happen? And nowadays, we have this gentleman, Mark Zuckerberg, who seems to be able to do the same thing, that ideas just, kind of sprout forth. He's able to make them work, put them out in the marketplace, and make really big things happen. But in reality, when you look at the innovation from these individuals and the tech sector at large, it's actually indicative of access to platforms. And some of the things that we're seeing in technology, I believe, have a lot of similarities to the world of automobiles. It's just that we've never really looked at it like this. So tonight I have some new findings I want to share with you guys. Some of this stuff is new material that I'm prototyping, so you're my guinea pig here. But the things that these two groups of people had in common were they had access to really cheap, great technology. So in the case of Wozniak and Jobs, they had access to a microprocessor chip called the 6502, which was really landmark for them. It was by a factor of about 7 or 8 cheaper than the next best microprocessor. And it allowed them to build things in their garage and essentially start Apple. There was also a language available at the time named BASIC, and Wozniak wrote a version of BASIC called Integer BASIC. So between Integer BASIC and this chip, you have the beginning of Apple, and it wasn't free, but it was very cheap. Well, fast forward to Mark Zuckerberg, and in fact, Zuckerberg has not only access to cheap technology, but he's also got a number of things that are available to him for absolutely free, what we would now call open source technology. So things like the World Wide Web, ubiquitous internet. The thing that he's able to use is what in the technology world you call the LAMP stack. LAMP is an acronym that stands for Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. Don't write that down. It won't really apply for the rest of my talk. But those are the tools that if you were to say to somebody in the technology world would mean as much as saying a Chevy small block or an intake manifold to somebody who would hang around a garage. So my belief is that we've seen this kind of cycle of innovation before, and that automobiles are actually the first true open source platform. But we haven't really looked at automobiles like this before. Platforms by themselves don't really make innovation. Platforms are really just an opportunity to do something. And so what's fascinating about bringing together a group of people with a platform is that occasionally you'll find these weird individuals who are able to see something other people can't see. So really, I believe that great technology people or great mechanics or great businessmen or great artists are actually quite similar because they're able to see something that other people can't actually see. And that's the mark of somebody who I believe is willing to distort the truth in the pursuit of their goal. And sometimes this goal is for noble reasons, sometimes not. And that's a little bit what I want to explore with you tonight. I'd like to start with an icon that you guys are all probably familiar with, and that's this photograph. This is a Lartigue photo that many people have called the most iconic photograph taken in the 20th century. It was taken in 1913. He called it at the time racing car. Sometimes he said he referred to it as Papa at 80 kilometers per hour. What we know about this photo is that it's actually quite different than most of the photos you saw in 1913. Most photos around this time are taken by amateurs, are in fact mimicking professional photography. So professional photography around this time is doing things like sitting portraits. So go into a portrait and pose with your family. They take the snapshot and you hang it up on your wall because cameras were still really expensive. This photo happens to be quite interesting because it's not like that. You see the car is moving, pulling all the way to the right of the frame. The people are moving all the way to the left. And a number of people in the last 50 or so years have drawn analogies to this being the sort of entryway into the speed age. What I love about the photo is that he actually is a really good photographer. His topic is motorsports, which is something I really love. But the way he took this photo is pretty interesting. It's worth us kind of digging into because essentially Lartigue is a hacker. That he's able to see a platform and do something that other people haven't seen or done before. And the way he takes his photo, he's actually panning it. So imagine a car going in front of him like this, and he's trying to track with the camera so that he follows the car in time, as opposed to standing on the side of the road and letting the car move forward. That would have produced sort of a blurred effect. He's actually trying to preserve the sanctity of the vehicle as it moves through the landscape. And he does a really good job. We can see so much of the vehicle is actually visible. You can see the bolts on the side of the sheet metal. You can actually see the way that the driver is gripping the steering wheel. It's almost like he's got his right knuckle, like he's holding on for dear life. He very well might be in 1913. And what I love is you can see the co-driver. He's got his hand behind the driver, and you can see his wedding ring. It's important for him to have his hand there because his job is actually to pressurize the fuel tank. So in this era of vehicle, you'd actually, as a co-driver, you'd reach over to the right and pump the fuel tank every 30, 40 seconds, depending on the speed. And so he puts his hand there to hold on, and his left hand's probably along the dashboard, something like that. Well, what's interesting is he took this photograph using an early box camera, and it had what was known as a focal point shutter. So as opposed to capturing the image from a center point, actually the way this camera works is the exposure started at the bottom and lifted up like this. And that's the reason why we see this effect. So if you can imagine the image starts getting exposed and the car's here, by the time the camera actually catches up with the top of the wheel, the car is actually moving out of frame, which is how you get this distortion. This is how he hacked this experience, and there's a pretty cool illustration of this. Imagine the white line is the focal plane shutter. And that's how this photo got hacked. I'll show it to you one more time here. So a lot of people have said, well, you didn't really mean to do this. Photography, I can pull out my camera, and sometimes I get a good shot. I take a lot of photographs. But there's a reason why, and I'll tell you in a second why I believe he actually did mean to do this. So learning how he did this, now we can actually walk back and construct an image without the distortion, which is how you get this. So this is the image he was maybe trying to take, or maybe thinking he was going to take. And this is actually just reversing the process we just saw. So the car is straight forward, the man is standing straight up and down. What's interesting about this image is it's not really that compelling. It's just a picture of a car and a guy standing by the side of the road. The beauty of the Lartigue image is that it's distorted, it's hacked. This image, by the way, and the animation was done by a guy who really loves this photograph. His name is Lindolfi. What's fascinating is that Lartigue wasn't actually famous after that photo came out. He lived in the world of photography. He was relatively obscure for about 50 years. And then sometime in the early 60s, he travels to New York City and he meets with a photo dealer, an agency essentially, like a Getty Images or an independent art rep. And the art rep looks at his stuff and he sees some of this early work from the turn of the century, and he realizes that Lartigue is actually really talented. And lo and behold, Lartigue has an exhibit at MoMA in New York in 1962 or 1963, and almost overnight he becomes the Lartigue that we know now, which is a representative of early photography and a really good one at that. But his memory is a little foggy, so this is actually the reverse of the print of the famous image. Taken, I don't know when this was printed, but my guess is that it was in the 60s. There might be some more info we can find out. But what I love is that you can see he's actually, either he's writing this or his assistant is trying to remember when the photograph was taken. You have 1911, 1912, 1913 crossed out twice, and then finally somewhere in the middle here somebody writes 1912. They're trying to guess, this is the Grand Prix of ACF, which is really just the Grand Prix of France. And what circuit was he at? He actually gets all this stuff wrong. Guillot driving a Delage, which is a French race car, gets it all wrong, but that's how MoMA believes it. In fact, when it's presented at MoMA, this is what they tell the world. What we know now is that, in fact, it was likely this car, which is a Schneider, which is a mark that almost nobody knows today. It's a French manufacturer of racing cars. They were in business for a few years back then. And the driver is a guy named René Croquet. And when we put these two images together, actually, we see that this is probably the car. Certainly the number 6 is pretty damn close. The tires, this shot was probably taken earlier in the day, so it's a cleaner tire. This one's got dirt on it. It's been running on the track. The holder for the gear selector is actually pretty similar. This photo in another resolution, I can show you that these bolt patterns align. But the thing I love the most is this thing right here, which is a scrape on the underbody. And the scrape on the underbody probably happened en route to the track. So this car was prepared at the Schneider factory, wherever that was, and driven. We see that scrape is also right here. So it's that's the closest thing the closest example I can give you for why we believe this is Croquet driving a Schneider in 1913. And I love this photograph. I also love the fact that everybody had it wrong for so many years, and now we're trying to clear up the mystery around a famous photograph. So that's pretty neat. Lartigue gets his first camera at age 8. He's born into a very wealthy family, and the things they do on the weekend are maybe like something an internet executive would do on the weekend. I mean, they're going to parties, tennis matches, flying in airplanes, looking at air shows, going to motorsport events. And he lives a life where technology for him is relatively cheap. So for him, starting at age 8 with his first camera, by the time he takes his photograph, this is actually 10 years later. So he's had 10 years of development to hack on cameras, which is pretty cool. To him, he lives in a world in a way like Mark Zuckerberg, who has ubiquitous internet. He doesn't really have to worry about the cost of electricity, processing power, things like that. So Lartigue lives this unique life because he's privileged, where he gets to hack on stuff and do cheap experimentation, and that's why you have this amazing, well, one of the reasons why you have this amazing photograph. And that's the reason why I think actually he meant to do what you see here. He had so many photos that he had taken by 1913 that he had gone through so many cycles of development that this was something that was not only was not an accident, but was more likely something he planned. I also love it because it's an early platform. It's early camera, early car. But the point of what I'm trying to communicate here is that the cars were a platform, and I haven't really talked about that. I've just talked about an interesting, rich French kid with a camera. But the photographs he was taking at the time of cars were actually more like this. Around 1910, this is more like an automotive innovation experience. This is a photograph of Henry Ford in 1909 at the tail end of the New York to Seattle race. This is a really important cross-country race, and there's a lot of publicity value to winning this race. So Ford puts together the might of the Ford Motor Company, which, by the way, is the third company he had started at this point. And he wins the race with an asterisk, but he entered 2 cars, And if you look at the small inset photo, he not only entered 2 cars, but he entered 2 cars plus a support vehicle, which is more than anybody else did. So he knew he wanted to win this race. Ford had a really amazing ability to see publicity value and to use it to sell real production cars. But it's an example of this isn't an era for innovation. This isn't a hot rodding era. This is really entrepreneurs becoming manufacturers and doing something interesting. And we don't see a real platform yet. But the first real platform we see in 1909. So these are all, well, parts or partial pieces of Model Ts. And I'm sure everybody in this room is familiar with some of the core values of the Model T: standard parts, interchangeable parts, 1 engine, 1 chassis, but 9 different body styles. And it's so new and different to sell cars like this. It's also new and different to build cars like this. In 1909, the process isn't totally smoothed out, so they're selling these cars, but they haven't figured out production yet. This is a chart of what Model T production looks like. Because the scale is so off the charts because of the 20s, you don't truly appreciate the value in this leap. But 1912 to 1913 is huge because this is the year that Henry Ford figures out assembly line production as we know it today. There are seeds of it back here, but it really isn't fully formed until 1913, and that's when you see what you'd call a hockey stick of production. The 1923 is the peak, and 1927 is when they're phasing in the new car. But it's an early platform. It's really modular, so you have cool stuff that's going on. It's not perfect. It's not a real platform, but guys are hacking on it. So this is a letter carrier. The roads stink. In the wintertime, they're not really plowed. Remember, the thing that plows your car in the wintertime is actually another car, and that doesn't really exist. So here's a letter carrier who's got treads in the back of his Model T. He's got an interesting wintertime cover for it, and he's got skis on the front. This is 1926. Here are 3 guys with actually, this is a very common sight. This is a Model T that's been hacked into a sawmill. So it's a rear drive car, so these wheels spin, and he's got a belt going to this contraption back here, which is not OSHA approved at all. And it's a sawmill. Look at all the wood they still have to go through, but so it looks like they're taking a little rest. This is actually quite common in the sort of teens and 20s. This is my favorite, though, because this is a minister who has a Model T that's a mobile church. So, in fact, he can take God wherever the road can take him. He's actually not entirely unique either. There were other people who had variations of bringing the church to you in their Model T. In the early parts of a platform, like you'd see in technology, in the Valley, there was a thing called the Homebrew Computer Club, which is the gathering space where all these Steve Wozniak, Steve Jobs would meet in the late 70s, mid to late 70s. Ford owners have versions of that. In fact, there's a magazine called Ford Owner that's put out of Milwaukee around this time. The best part of Ford Owner is the hints from other Ford owners. And it's still really early, so you see things like this is a really great contraption. The Model T to begin with, had a flat seat. And so this guy says, I suppose nearly all Ford owners who drive a great deal have found that the front seat cushion is too flat or lacking in spring. This makes long rides tiresome and gives one a pain or lameness in the small of the back. And this is his hack for that. There's a great book called Tinkering, which is in the notes to this if you guys look after class. And it's by Kathleen Franz. It came out a couple years back. And she says motorists and manufacturers are essentially the same people. That the development of this Model T is really a live beta. So if you were to release an app or software program, you typically do your QA testing in-house and then release it once it was stable. And the Model T was not like that. It was, in fact, a beta in the hands of the public. But the platform we're starting to get a real platform now. 1920 to 1930 is kind of the time when it becomes real. And this is a really fascinating era. A couple things happen. 1919, something really important happens for cars, but also all of us in this room and American consumers in general, which is the General Motors Acceptance Corporation, which means you can not just buy a car, you can buy time. You can buy a car over time. You can borrow against whatever you say you can borrow against. It's really quite pivotal for the automotive industry. Model T production peaks in 23. In 27, a really important thing happens, which is the number of new cars bought is actually greater. The number of new cars bought as a replacement vehicle is bigger than the number of new cars bought by people who are buying their first car, which is the wordiest thing I've probably ever said in my entire life. But if you understand that, you'll value the fact that this is a critical point in new technology becoming mature within an audience. The crash happens in 29, which dampens the ability for this technology platform to really grow in the 30s, but the flathead V8, which I'll talk about in a second, is so critical that it doesn't really affect that too much. In the 20s and 30s, we're seeing things that are really interesting. I pulled out a couple of examples here. This is a rumble seat cover, and essentially it's a way to protect passengers and cargo in a rumble seat in the event of bad weather. It's essentially a Tupperware top for your rumble seat. Well, this was actually invented by a guy named Earl S. Tupper, who would go on to invent Tupperware and become a billionaire. Tupper, in fact, gets so enthusiastic about designing stuff for cars that he gets a little crazy as a hacker. And this is one of my favorite Tupper innovations, which is a dripless ice cream cone. And the dripless ice cream cone, the directions, this was never brought to market, but I'll read you his notes. The melting cream runs down the side of cone into the gutter. 2, the gutter catches melted cream running down side of cone. And 3, cream runs back into cone through drain hole from gutter. He never received a patent on this. This is from his notebooks. His notebooks are now in the Automotive History Museum in Detroit. And I love this because it's so bizarre, and you can just imagine him one afternoon thinking about this, probably as he ate an ice cream cone. This is another really important invention, and it's called a resilient buffer. It's an automobile bumper, but it's nice because it can integrate with the frame rails of the vehicle, and there's some tension when you bring those two strips of metal together and clasp them. There's a little bit of bounce there. This was developed by a guy named, whose last name is Lyon, and he's a really prolific inventor. He's like the 5th or 6th most prolific inventor of all time, behind Thomas Edison. And he lived out the rest of his life in Bimini. There's a great piece about Lyon in the notes that appeared in Sports Illustrated. This is a really important thing because it shows that people are starting to think about not just the car, but things around the car, which is a sign of getting to be more of a mature platform. And this is a jack for your car. This is developed by a guy named Willard Walker. And the Walker name is still around today. There's a company called Walker Exhausts. And Walker is actually, it's a part of Tenneco, which is an enormous automotive holding company. And something very similar to this is probably in your car today. But the big moment comes in 32. This is, in my mind, this is the Apple II moment of automobile innovation. This is the Ford Flathead V8. And the reason why this is so important is because it truly democratizes innovation and speed for every single person who cares about this sort of stuff, which in 1932 is actually a good number of people. It's really simple, it's innovative. As we're going through the Depression, it actually helps give people a reason to get out and do their own innovation in their garage. The Flathead V8 kind of lives through the Depression, and after the Depression, there's a racing boom, which is really mostly Ford Flathead V8 based. It's ubiquitous. It's in all sorts of different stuff. It's really cool. And it drives a lot of competition, which is what you want in a market. It's what I refer to as an Apple II moment. So the Apple II, for those of you who aren't familiar, was arguably the computer that made Apple succeed. And it was the first real usable home computing device for the everyman. I haven't done the full analogy if it was the same value, but it's pretty close thematically to the Ford Flathead V8. Cool stuff goes on when the Flathead V8 comes out. This is one of my favorite cards. It's Dick Kraft. He creates this thing called the Bug in 1950. Some people have called this the rail job. And this is a Ford Flathead V8. And not much else. So he's got what appears to be a lawn chair that he's sitting in, and somebody said that Dick Kraft's appreciation for lightweight design extended to what he wore on the street. So Dick Kraft, in fact, has no shirt on. And I don't know if he's got a pair of socks on either. This is an example of competition in the space. This is a 49 Plymouth, referred to as High and Mighty. It was developed by a bunch of guys at Chrysler. And their theory was that because drag racing cars tended to pop up when you got on the gas, that if they could just put more weight, if they could put the center of gravity higher, the theory was that the car would stay low to the ground. A lot of people actually copied this idea around this time. And the big Nirvana moment comes in 1955. This is the Chevy small block V8, which is almost, in my mind, is like the internet moment for automobile open source development. It's the first time we've seen something that's so incredibly powerful, so cheap, but so elegant. And it's something that allows an entire industry to grow. What's fascinating about the Chevy small block is it comes at a unique time. It's 20 years after the Ford Flathead V8 comes out in '32, but people at this point have a lot more mechanical sort of knowledge, and there's more of a do-it-yourself ethos within the world of people who work on their cars. So you have a number of reasons for that. One, you had the Great Depression, but you also have World War II, and you have a hot rodding community that's waiting for something this simple and this beautiful. And in fact, it's a simple product, but you have this kind of knowledge maturity in the air, and it takes off. You also have an improved road network, so you have the Eisenhower Highway Act that's happening in '56. It's a very stable platform. So when we talk about platforms in the Bay Area, one of the things that's really critical is making sure that the platform's stable, that it actually works, but that there's actually a long-term commitment so that you have longevity. In other words, you don't want somebody to build Microsoft Windows and then 12 months later Microsoft goes out of business. You want a platform so that you as a developer can build on it. And that's what the Chevy small block was. It was created in '55, and today it's still being sold. There are actually over 100 million Chevy small blocks on the road today, which is an incredible number. So you have all the things that you get with the beginnings of this really mature platform, books and articles and things like that. The watershed moment for the rest of the world, people who don't just care about cars every single day, every single hour of the day, but for normal people who haven't been exposed to this article is the key watershed moment. This is Life magazine in '57. They put drag racing on the cover. But it's not, what's interesting about this article is not just about drag racing, guys going fast. It's about the ingredients to actually create this in your hometown. It's almost bizarrely evangelical, like the hot rod industry paid for it. So you have, in this case, here's a photograph of a shop in Hollywood. And Southern California area was really quite advanced when it came to the world of drag racing. What I love is this next page. On the left, you have almost like a catalog ordering form, or when you look through a Toys R Us catalog, you have all the parts laid out and they're all identified. But what I love even more is the dictionary. So this article tells you not only what you can do and how you can dress, but in fact, here's how you can talk. So you can actually learn how to be a hot rodder, and you can bring hot rodding to your little neck of the woods. This article is key. It also allows these really fascinating people who are willing to hack and distort the truth to come into the world. On the left, he's not facing the camera, but it's Smokey Yunick, who might be, if you were to draw an analogy to technology, is the closest thing we have to Steve Wozniak. He has a preternatural ability to see engineering like no other person at the time. So his innovations are, to put it kindly, ahead of the rule book in most racing sanctioning bodies. As it turns out, most of the stuff he developed, they build rules against stuff that he innovated on. He was a true hacker. To give you a couple examples, he built a car once. It was 7/8 scale. So one of the hard things in racing is you have to push through this big bubble of air. And he figured out if I could make it 7/8 the size, they probably wouldn't know. but I'd be cutting through less air and I could win more races. He got caught for that. He also dipped body panels in acid and would order thinner windows to lighten up vehicles. So he was like a true hacker. The guy on the right is Vic Edelbrock, who's interesting because he started innovating on Ford flathead V8s and then ended up building a really incredible breathing system for Chevy small blocks. It's still sold today. It's an intake manifold, and you can still buy it. And the world this whole world is swirling around, and there are people who try to make it very sanitary. Here's a very sanitary photo of a high school hot rod jamboree. And these people all have clean shaven faces and clean shirts, and the cars aren't even moving. In fact, the cars are not even moving, and they're parked inside the lines. It's about as perfect as you would imagine the hot rodding and hacking world wants to be viewed within the world of America, which at this point in time is still trying to figure out, are these guys really evil or are they good? So this is kind of the light side of that. The dark side is this, which is this is a collection of mugshots from November 1955, the same day. So these guys all get hauled in to the police station, and I love the guy on the right because he just looks so cool. He looks like he's so bummed out to be caught, and in every single photo, there's another photo that's out of frame, but he thinks this is just such a bummer, man. And so this is the dark side of the moon. And that, in my world, is I think the beginnings of this kind of platform discussion with automobiles. And I believe that we're going to start to draw more analogies to technology as technology goes through its sine curve. And I believe that hot rodding and hacking are a lot closer than we had previously thought. And I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you, Reilly. Why don't we start with just some questions from the audience, if anybody wants you to elaborate on something. I've got a bunch of things to talk about, but let's throw it open first. Anybody?
Yep.
Ford seems to have led this development. In parallel with them, were there others that were equally as innovative?
In the late 20s, the Chevrolet six-cylinder engine was starting to really gain steam. Ford had a four-cylinder motor for the Model T development, and everyone within the Ford Motor Company said to Henry, we need to build a six-cylinder engine, and you need to replace the Model T. And it made him angry because he believed that the Model T was just the perfect answer to everything. So Chevrolet starts to come on board with this six-cylinder engine, and people are starting to tweak it. And in a move of defiance, he says that we are going to not build a six-cylinder engine, and everybody gasps. Then he said, we're going to build an eight-cylinder engine. And it takes a long time because it's difficult to cast the eight-cylinder engine the way they did it. But they do it a number of years later, and it's his last great act. He dies after that. Chevrolet is the closest. In the 50s, before the Chevy small block comes out, Ford and Chrysler have great engines that they're developing, but the Chevy small block is this watershed moment for not only General Motors, but the rest of the hacker community.
I had a question about semantics. What's the difference between innovation and invention in this kind of a scenario?
That's a really great question. I always think of inventions as being something that has a seal of, is really official, like this is my invention, I've done this. And innovation is something that I believe is maybe not necessarily one moment in time. Is that how you see it, Michael? I don't know. I'd love to hear how you guys feel about that. Yeah, it feels like it's more of a period of innovation and a process and a moving window.
So you have already something and you work from that something, so to speak. And the person, because I was looking at the history of cars, I was interested of, I found something, I know nothing about cars, but I looked at the internet, and you can then say that the inventor of, I think, of the first car is that Mercedes-Benz. Actually, he was the inventor of cars. He got the whole idea of how to put something that will move with wheels. versus these people said, okay, we already have this, how can we make it more effective, more efficient, more productive?
Sure. What's interesting about that period of the late 19th century is that there's a lot of car development that's happening, and they don't talk to each other because we're not in the era of internet and newspapers that can travel the world in one day. But they have a lot of similar thoughts. Some people actually end up developing stuff a lot faster, and maybe that's a good way to think about an invention is maybe for the perspective of the Mercedes or the Benz, that it's happening in one space, it's an invention, but the spirit of innovation or the spirit of change is happening in this period of time and around the world. But it's a really great question. I don't know if I've ever heard anybody address that, and I'd love to figure out someone smarter than me to answer that question. Yeah, John?
The whole hot rodding thing is really interesting for me, and it's really interesting to me that you've made this parallel, because both you and I are foreigners in California.
Right.
You've come from the Midwest, and I've come from Europe. And of course, in Europe, we never really had V8 cars. So I completely accept what you've said here for California. I think it's remarkable for California. Do you think it's as true for where you grew up in the Midwest? Because it's not as true in Europe, or at least those yardsticks that you use, those two V8 engines, they don't have the same currency in Europe. So do they in the Midwest?
They did. In some ways they still do. But when I grew up and I was coming of age wanting to buy a car, it was arguably the worst period of domestic car development that we've ever seen, the mid-'70s to the sort of early '90s. And unfortunately, for the perspective of this talk, I would say no, that it wasn't as important in this sort of late '70s to 1990 phase. But the spirit of hot rodding is something that continues to live on, and it's not, I don't think we'll ever see it die. V8, the use of a V8 engine to do hot rodding it's funny when you see something in the UK or in Europe that has a V8 and is domestic, because it's almost like seeing a Ferrari. There's a celebrity aspect to seeing that. And I think it's the calling card of that early form of American development. I don't think it's now as compelling for the entire breadth of what we might call an automotive hacker, because there's so much more in the way of engine development that arguably is more innovative, certainly more technologically more advanced. If you were to look at something with, whether it's a VTEC engine, a very small engine that gets incredible power but only uses a certain amount of fuel, I think there's so much more to be excited about now if you're a guy who loves cars or girl, that we've kind of matured beyond just that being important. But back then, in the 50s, I think there was almost a singular focus in the United States on this type of development. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Is hot rodding, I don't know if I've ever really thought about this before, but John's kind of brought it to bear. Is hot rodding an American thing, or is there a European or Asian counterpart to the modification and hot rodding and resculpting things that were already there to make something cool?
Sure.
Just before you start, Reilly, is there a neat definition of hot rodding?
No, but let's make one.
Yeah,
Right.
let's give it a go, because it would help. Because I'm intrigued by this.
Yeah.
Go on. Yeah.
In many ways, hot rodding is the same definition as the word technology, which is using a little to make a lot. How can I use this thing I've been given and make something more out of it? And it just happens to use a vehicle. This type of hot rodding that I'm talking about tonight is unique to America. You do see development of automotive hacking that's happening all around the world, but in the 50s in the United States, it's arguably a leader. You have such great engine development going on in the United States in the 50s. There's different sorts of engine development with a tuner community that are happening around the world, but and John can prove me wrong. I can give the American perspective of, I believe this is the forefront of engine development and hot rodding in the United States. The United States is really the leader. Well, this, in fact, hot rodding is drag racing. So drag racing comes out of the belief that I'm going to make my car faster than your car. There's nothing about hot rodding that says it needs to be on this particular road or it needs to be here. It's a loose description of a lot of innovation around cars. The word hot rod has been, I think, melded into a American phrase that means this type of V8 domestic development, perhaps because there's a magazine called Hot Rod where that's really what they cover. Whereas if I had a Honda Civic and we tuned it to 600 horsepower, you might be able to call that hot rodding, but you also get a bunch of people who would argue that's tuning and not hot rodding. And we can be here for 12 hours.
So hot rodding is a kind of, comes under tuning. So tuning is a broader thing, but hot rodding is particularly in the kind of purest.
Depending on who's in the room, one would be above the other. It's like, no, tuning is, no, hard.
Yeah.
And I think.
So is it all about modifying what you've got? I like this, getting more out of what you have.
Yeah.
But you do it in different ways, and there are kind of unwritten rules about how you do that, yeah?
This is what I think great platforms produce cultures. And so hot rodding in the 50s is really this word that's created and used. And as we move 50 years beyond the creation of this engine, it now means something different. It's connected to the name of a magazine. If we were to say hot rodding in a group of car people, they might define it as such because these technologies and platforms carry culture with them. So tuning, if we were in an audience of maybe a couple weeks ago, there was a Japanese classic car show in Southern California, and that means something totally different to them. But I think that's actually a healthy thing, and when we get 50 years out of internet development, there's probably other versions of internet development that will say, oh, I'm a hacker, oh, I'm a software developer, I'm an app builder, and they believe that they're fundamentally different from the next person, but if you were to ask my mother, they're the same, they're doing the same thing. Do you know, does that make sense? Right. Well, that's true. Yep.
So I think a lot of these companies kind of originated in Detroit around there.
Yeah, but the culture was there's a huge California aspect to this.
Yeah, I was wondering why would it be so if they originated there, why would it have gotten so? There's a 12-month cycle to hot rodding that's not possible in Detroit, having been there, having lived there. You also have a lot of interesting innovation that's happening in California that's somewhat related to defense and aerospace. It's not actually happening in Detroit. There's a lot of development in Detroit for defense and aerospace, but California is unique in that you have so many different types of industry. You also have there's a bit of a buccaneer spirit to California development that I believe exists now and was similar back then, which is we don't have to accept a product as it's given to us. We can actually make something how we think it should operate, which is a hacker kind of spirit that is not native to Michigan necessarily. Yep.
Well, Ford Motor Company is also coming to Silicon Valley. Just within the last year, a research laboratory has been opened in Palo Alto, and the premise of it is open sourcing. And there's a lot of work being done that would relate to one of our previous lectures. It was talking about vehicle-to-vehicle communication. So, like now, if you have a modern car with a fancy navigation system and you push the traffic information button, it doesn't warn you about anything, but you're sitting in gridlock and you're like, well, this thing is useless because it takes too long for the information to flow through the current system. So now things that allow cars to talk to each other while maintaining people's privacy, just like saying, okay, there's a slowdown on the 280 or whatever. So the open sourcing idea of Detroit opening a lab here is because the innovators are here, so the innovators will have closer access to the people in automobile manufacturing that can roll out some of their ideas that they can end up working. And there's even research being done about parking, for example, like if you drive somewhere to like an urban area, like you drive your car to San Francisco, and you're just driving around and around and around looking for parking, so you're burning gas and creating emissions and wasting time. Hopefully someday there will be a satellite system that will be able to communicate with your car to advise you of where the next open parking spot is. And you'll simply go to the garage and they'll be able to fit more in because you'll be able to get out of your car, push a button, and it will just drive itself into the parking spot just an inch or so away from the car next to it, disallowing any necessary space for opening the doors. You'll be able to fit more cars.
Yeah,
That's all being worked on.
I think
Palo Alto.
there's so many car companies that are opening up in this area that it feels a little bit like Detroit in 100 years ago, because you have the big companies that are opening up labs like Ford and General Motors, BMW, in fact, all of them. But you also have all these startups that are trying to become the next maybe Tesla or General Motors. And you have these small technology companies that are trying to sell a particular widget. Maybe it's a piece of software or a new way to do infotainment. So this area right now has so many new companies related to automobiles, which is part of the reason why Stanford has a lot of great automotive innovation right now, because we produce graduates who are working at these companies, but they all want to come to Stanford to connect with each other and to learn something. And that's part of what the REVS program does. Yep.
I was thinking that you mentioned democratization when you were talking about I guess it was the Chevy 1955.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it seems to me that in hot rods, at that point, and maybe up until the 70s, people could actually do something to their car and actually drive it on the road.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't see how people who are going to be hacking their cars now are even going to be allowed to
Right.
change them.
Right.
So it seems to me that we've really lost something.
Yeah, I think you make a brilliant point, and you should be CEO for at least a day or maybe a year at one of these companies to convince them of that. Because, sure.
I have been waiting for someone to actually design a car that people could, that would have not too many emissions, but that people could actually work on their own. I'm sure there's a market for this. And have modules and things like this, but somehow the state would allow you to do this.
Right. I would love to buy that car. The reality is, we open up the hood of our car and it's a black piece of plastic, which isn't a really compelling experience if you want to think about using your car, interfacing with it. And I think that's what's that?
Get car kits and build cars. It just costs.
Yeah, but we've put ourselves in this position where consumers, or the belief that consumers want a car that you really don't even have to do anything but put gas in it, and there's a huge portion of the population that believes that's of incredible value. Unfortunately. Right. They want exactly, and there's enough market value there where a lot of cars are being developed like that, but we've lost a lot of connection to how cars make us feel. So in fact, some of the cars that still produce these experiences like maybe older cars used to do, whether it's maybe a little bit more sensitive steering, or you can hear more of the road, or the car tells you more about you, those cars tend to be more valuable, actually have more street value cost, but we perceive them as being more valuable. One of the things that I love about, for instance, the Mini Cooper, so I don't know if any of you in the room own a Mini Cooper, but one of the fascinating things about that car is it feels like it's going fast even when you're not driving that fast, which is a hard thing to do, actually. So a lot of cars now have incredible amount of horsepower. You can buy a Corvette that has almost 700 horsepower, but you have to almost kill yourself to have fun with a lot of these cars. And so cars that can somehow dial in an experience where you can have fun without doing a lot, I think there's real value. For working on cars, I believe that we're entering an era when people will work on vehicles more and pull more data out of them and be able to do more, but manufacturers feel really nervous about this. Ford has a system that they're offering up right now. Essentially, it's a platform where you can build apps on top of one technology system, but you can't yet hack into the car to change it. You can only read material from it. In other words, if the car is traveling 50 miles per hour and the steering wheel is turned 18 degrees to the left, you can receive that information, but you can't tell the car to go 60 and turn the wheel to the right. Yet, not yet, maybe for good reason. So I think we might get into that again, but right now we're in this fog of people want so much of their car that we've basically dialed out the experience. We've dialed out the difficulty involved with keeping your car maintained. And it's like having a robot dog or having a real dog. You know, you love your dog because it's a great dog, but you also have to take it out, and you have to feed it, and occasionally it barks at your neighbor, but you love the dog. Having a robot dog sounds great because it solves all those issues, but it's a robot. And no one really likes robot dogs. We have a real dog at home, who I love.
So, boy, there's a lot going on here. You had some earlier thoughts on not just the open source, but the technology being available for people to work on, right? And that part of that technology was the V8, V8, and that sort of thing. So nowadays, in some cases, the technology is not available, right? So there's a big movement in the electric auto groups. Silicon Valley is the center of the EAA association, right? And they design their own cars, or they take existing cars and convert them. But the gap in the technology is the battery. The motor's there, the inverters are there, the controllers, et cetera, right? But they can't do much more than drive 30 miles because the technology doesn't exist to go further. And some guys do that, and then you get these Teslas and things like that that go to 60 miles an hour in 4 seconds.
Yeah.
Right. So I think your point on the technology being in existence in the same place, but then the open source is the other bit, right? So you've got people like GM and Ford who in the 90s built these electric cars and sold them to the marketplace, but the technology to do anything with them, they kept to themselves. And for the very first time, in my understanding, in their history, they wouldn't tell people how to fix the cars, and they wouldn't sell parts, right? So that was in the electric car, right?
I think that batteries are, once we cross over a certain threshold, are the Ford flathead V8 or Chevy small block of a new generation, because we're still in this world where batteries are, in some cases, more than the cost of the car. Yeah. So I drove a Honda Fit electric vehicle a little while ago, and it was about 38 grand. And a Honda Fit, if you were to buy one in at the dealership with a gas engine, is 19,000. So it's really a battery plus a Honda Fit for your $40,000, which for most people is just simply unacceptable. In California, there are actually a number of Chevy Volts where we live, but it's not like that everywhere. And I think for batteries to get to a price point that feels like Ford flathead V8, that's when we're going to see a new wave of EVs. We're just not there right now. So we are almost in this, it's almost like we're in 1923 or 24 in the sense that there's interesting development going on. It's early days for this platform, but there's no Henry Ford saying we need to build a flathead V8 because it's a bit of a science problem right now. We have a lot of really smart people working on it, but we're not there yet. If we can get
intellectual ownership has become predominant, it's just not playing platform anymore.
Yeah, it's not, but so many battery manufacturers sell their batteries to Ford or General Motors. So LG Chem is a big battery company.
Except for Chevron.
What's that?
Except for Chevron. Chevron bought Ovonics in the 90s, 2000s, and then sued Panasonic to stop building the large format nickel metal hydride batteries that was putting the EV1 at 120 miles on a charge. They pulled the batteries off the market. Might have been a good reason for that, but they've held that technology secret.
Well, now I think that we're in an era where we're using, it's essentially like we have a need to put flathead V8s in all of our devices. Everything needs a lithium battery, your phone, your computer, your car. Lithium is such a precious resource that, in fact, most people don't know that a lot of lithium lives in South America and China. And it's pretty soon we're going to start appreciating the fact that lithium will become even more precious, perhaps more expensive. But I believe that battery development, which is happening at this big level with companies like LG Chem. There's another company called A123, which just went bankrupt a couple days ago. I believe that this is this important next wave, but it's treacherous. It's when you're in the early stages of this platform, you'll have a ton of people go out of business, a ton of people will make money, a ton of people will lose money, and it's a game for risk takers. It's what you want to see in an early platform. It's going to happen though. Yes?
So that gives me a question of what's worth keeping and how do you know if something's worth closing? Like the V8s are really cool and everyone talks about how awesome they are. They were cool in the 50s, having a V8 is still cool now, but it looks like in 10 years having a V8 won't be that cool anymore. Like you'll have a Tesla awesome battery instead, and there'll be some number attached to it. So there are other things attached to driving that are going to be, they're going away, like self-driving cars are there. Is parking still useful? Is being able to drive a manual transmission still useful? So like, what I'm curious is for revs, like, I feel like there's kind of an archival of experience that's trying to happen. So how do you sort what is worth archiving and how do you decide?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I think one of the things we lose sight of is in new development, there will be all these new things that we don't even know exist that are going to be fabulous. We don't know about what's going to happen in 30 years with some great engine technology that might feel totally new and different from the way a V8 makes us feel. And I love vehicles, so I'm excited for that era. I love watching sports car racing where there's a lot of hybrid and EV development, and that doesn't make me feel like a Philistine. You know, it makes me feel like I like the fact that it's moving forward and there's new development. But to think about archiving things, I actually believe that cars are still so young. So, you know, cars are 100 or so years old. And for Michael Shanks, that's like, you know, not even a blip on the radar. For an archaeologist, we still can talk to our users. As he said before, he doesn't usually talk to his users. And so we can still talk to people who drive cars. In fact, you can still see a Model T run. What about in 500 years if we haven't blown each other up? Will we see a Ferrari GTO at an event? And will we see somebody turning on the engine and putting in actual petroleum fuel in the tank? I actually don't know the answer to that. And so we believe that there are a lot of things that are happening now that haven't been archived that are really important to archive. One of the Rev's research projects is actually taking data on cars we've never taken data from before. So a Ford GT40 from the 1960s, no one ever did instrumented testing on it. We're doing some of that, and we're trying to figure out the answer to your question, and I believe that the answer might be you take a curated sample of a lot of interesting things, not everything.
You talked about the personalities, and I'm just drawing I like your platform parallel, but I find myself thinking Zuckerberg, Bill Gates, and Smokey Yuna. Smokey Yuna was somebody who supposedly could tell how a car was running just by listening to it. He didn't even need his stethoscope.
Right.
Whereas Zuckerberg is, and this might be a stereotype, but this is somebody who sort of geeked out on his computer. He didn't get his fingers dirty. Now, maybe it was different for Jobs and Wozniak. They actually built the machine, but isn't there a big difference between Zuckerberg having some good ideas and Smokey Yuna actually with the oil under his fingernails?
I think, yeah, I mean, you've exposed the fact that this could be a perfectly awful analogy. But the first version of Facebook, Zuckerberg, he developed, whether or not he developed it to become Facebook or a company for two very large twins is the subject of a movie. But he did actually do, what's that? Yeah, so he built it. He's not there every day coding and doing things, but you know, Smokey probably wasn't in the engine shop as much as he got older. I think he was a true hacker, though. He still is. There's still a culture of hacking at Facebook, and I say the word hacking in a very in a positive light. Here in the Bay Area, you can do that. I believe that all these guys have this belief that they actually have to develop something themselves because there aren't enough people to see that also see their vision. So a lot of these guys and girls who work really well on an early platform and develop something new are real mechanics, so to speak, that they actually do know how to build. So Jobs, probably not. He actually did do work on computers and had the ability to write software, but Wozniak was so far and away better than him that he knew that that was Wozniak's gift and his was perhaps the other sides of the business. But the other people in the Valley who are now famous for development, whether it's some new person like the people who did Instagram, or think back in the day with Hewlett and Packard, these are all at their core, they're mechanics or hackers. They just grow into bigger companies where all of a sudden, you become a CEO and you're no longer running the engine bay. But I think that it's still very much, that's the way to do it right. The world of becoming a millionaire just by being an MBA is decidedly an East Coast concept. And I think that the world of being a millionaire by being a mechanic or a hacker is a West Coast concept. And that's the spirit that I see here at Stanford too.
I want to actually start with this fascinating question about innovation and invention, and just connect it with a whole bunch of words, concepts, ideas that you put in front of us, Reilly. The hacker as a mechanic, okay, and then we've had innovation, yes, invention, but also development, and then connected with that fundamentally to your presentation was the platform, and how it connects with all these different things. Then we've got other things, other notions like tinkering you used, and kind of modification kind of comes in there, customization, and then a kind of specialized term as well, I think, certainly to cars, tuning. Okay, so we've got a wonderfully rich kind of set of distinctions here. But let me just put my archaeologist hat on with innovation and invention. Because when we're looking as archaeologists, anthropologists, at the bigger long-term picture on how things change, and let's call that both the reproduction of society, keeping going, but also how it changes, which is the issue, of course, of innovation change. And one of the things I think that there is fairly widespread agreement on is that invention, in the sense of something new and almost a kind of disruptive change, something big, new, it's never been here before. It's not that it comes out of the blue, but when you see it in prehistory, boy, you notice, because it's not been there before, arrives as invention. It's very rare. Mm-hmm. We don't often see invention. One of the clear inventions, I think, in prehistory is the wheeled transport. That's what you mean, wheeled transport. And the reason we would call it an invention is that we see the first examples of wheeled vehicles, and they're out in essentially Central Asia, and we can watch them spread as an invention. They're taken up as something that's, boy, that really makes a difference. That's a good invention. So it was kind of made once or in one area, and then it spreads. Metallurgy, though, is less even of a clear case of invention, that they came up with a way of, smelting particularly iron, or rather turning iron ore into iron. That seems to have, again, been spread out rather than being a single invention. But there was something on your slides that I wanted to just follow up on this, that kind of suggested, and I think we've had an indication in the audience that this might be a way of following through this notion. Those sketches that you had and those drawings of inventions were labeled inventor at the bottom. And then they were signed by attorneys, right? Now, was that because they were patents?
The drawings you were looking at were from the U.S. Patent Office, so yeah, they were.
Yeah.
They were actually filings that were approved, so they were full patents, not just the application. Yep.
So because I think one of the connections that has been suggested is that you want to be an inventor. You want to have an invention because it's yours. Mm-hmm. And it is this notion of the singular invention that you can then monetize, essentially. There is another case study from the late 19th century, because we got into the 19th century, didn't we? You know, as to this period of innovation, and was Mercedes, you know, was it Benz or whoever it was?
Benz.
Benz, right, okay. Yeah, who, you know, there's the claim that they invented the car.
Yes.
Yeah. And you rightly, I think, pointed out, actually there was a load of things going on at the time, which makes it less than easy to say that person did it. The analogous case is, or an analogous case, is with, you know, one of the great figures in American invention, who's Thomas Edison. And the case that I dug into was the light bulb. Because we all know, because we've perhaps seen, you know, Spencer Tracy in the movie in the 1950s, that Thomas Edison invented the light bulb and changed, you know, the world because of that. He actually does admit that himself, but he also claims invention, because the light bulb was around for most of the 19th century. It was, you know, well known, the principle of running a current through a resisting material in whatever kind of atmosphere would generate heat and light. But yeah, the key about Edison was he was the first to actually develop it as a feasible commercial product. But the story is really incredibly convoluted. I remember a scene in the movie. The title of the movie escapes me now. No, it isn't The Wizard of Menlo Park. It's something like it. But that's the name of a book about Edison. But the kind of story that goes with Edison is, you know, he's got a lab, and it's a R&D lab. Okay, so it's research and development, and he's got this notion. He's seen into it, you know, that wow, if we could have an electric light, it would be a really cool invention, and people would adopt it. They'd go for it, and I would make, you know, more money, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so the story, as again shared or as shown in the movie, is that he saw his task and the lab's task as developing the appropriate materials, the filament, the relationship between the filament and the current, and then indeed how you would contain the filament. Is it in a vacuum flask, or is it in a gas or whatever? And the trial and error, you know, he'd had the insight, literally, the light bulb goes off, we need light bulbs. And then it's, okay, now we need to develop the right materials, because I've got the idea, when we get the materials right, it'll work, you know? And that's the development phase. And so they were experimenting with different materials, different combinations of what I've just said. And in fact, it was nothing like that at all. The key to the development of the light bulb, as I say, the principles were well known. They were patented well before Edison. What Edison managed to do incredibly successfully was provide, and this absolutely goes with your argument, a platform, precisely a platform for electric light bulbs to make sense. There was no reason why anybody would want a light bulb in the 1870s, 80s, because gas lighting was perfectly functional, and you know, city blocks across the United States were all tubed up for gas delivery. Right. There were no electrical infrastructures, wiring, or power stations, or whatever. And any kind of power plant to drive your electric light bulbs at the time was going to have to be relatively close to the point of consumption of the electricity. So to have New York lit by any kind of light bulb was going to essentially require a power plant on every block, because they couldn't transfer the current efficiently enough to the point of consumption.
I think that's the thing that we can point to when we place value on Edison with the light bulb, because there might have been a number of people who actually developed the light bulb. Yeah. But it takes somebody who's a little bit off center, who can see more than just the light bulb, who can see the platform, or can see something the rest of the community hasn't seen. And you see this in all forms of development, whether it's light bulb and engine, software, maybe down the road, some other form of innovation, because we all get into these fights about who created what first, but you really need this one person who's willing to distort the truth, distort reality, to see something that nobody else saw. And that's the thing I love about all these platforms. They tend to have people like this. They tend to have somebody who's willing to take a risk. Sometimes it's a really awful risk, and we don't celebrate those failures because they're largely forgotten about. But this is what he did, which is different from maybe the guy who actually invented the light bulb.
What I think we're getting to say is, certainly for the likes of Edison in this particular case, it wasn't actually the technology that mattered. It was partly his vision, okay? But it was also how Edison managed to persuade New York City Council to let a PR event go ahead, which was he was acting against the gas companies, who of course did not want in any way him to challenge their monopoly on power and energy delivery. But it was essentially a smart political, in the best sense of it, small p sense of the word, his political negotiating skills that did this, in the sense of persuading the city council to let him wire up a block, take out a bit of it to stick a power plant there, show that with an infrastructure this could happen, and then also prove that it could be cheaper than what you already had and more efficient. And so what drove his particular combination of power plant, wiring, the material in the wiring, the degree of copper that was in there, plus the filament and light bulb, the current that's coming into it, what's in the light bulb, the gas, whatever. It was all determined essentially by the price of copper on the commodity markets at the time. That was the bottleneck in his system, because that was expensive bit. To keep it lower than gas prices, he had to have basically a certain thickness or purity of copper in the cabling that would allow a certain current to come through, go through a filament, and generate more light, had to be more light, than gas. And so what determined the filament and the gas and the vacuum, and well, it wasn't vacuum, it was the gas in the, literally the glass bulb, the materials were not just there because of a technical discovery. They were there because they were determined by, as I say, the price of copper on the commodity markets. Because he could only have copper of a certain thickness that could only take a certain current. And therefore, he could only work with that current. And therefore, Ohm's law comes in, right? So the material that's going to resist the current and therefore glow, and the thickness was determined by the politics of the commodity market, or the economics of the commodity market, which is a very interesting connection, I think.
Yeah.
And what I'm kind of saying is, technology sometimes isn't always technology. It's all this other stuff too. And that's why I like this notion of platform. Because, it's kind of, what does it really mean?
You know who Edison's biggest fan was too? Henry Ford.
Yeah.
So, I mean, so much of what I love about Henry Ford, there's a lot not to love about Henry Ford, but he had this ability to see opportunities like that and perhaps negotiate things that the average automotive entrepreneur at the time wouldn't do. So whether it's putting together 3 cars to cross country, to do the cross country race to win that, or to influence other rules and regulations within municipalities, he did that, and I believe it's because of the strong Edison influence.
One of the therefore the things, going back to this innovation invention thing, because we had the wonderful example that we've actually explored in Revs of this Peugeot or Peugeot racing prior to the First World War. And indeed, it's not just Peugeot, but the development of automotive technology goes incredibly fast in the first couple of decades. So there's all this stuff developed, let's call it that. And then it kind of, it isn't that it goes static, it's just, it all seems to just happen very, very quickly. Then the issue becomes, well, is it development? In archaeology, or history of technology, the distinction here is a very simple one, which is between invention, when something comes, light bulb, wow, we'll have that, it's a good idea. That's okay. That seems to be happening all the time. That's a kind of baseline in human history. There's no end of good new ideas. The issue is not that, it's adoption. It's why would you ever take up something that could, not untypically, be incredibly disruptive. And you just can't cope with it because you don't have all the other connections. The light bulb is a great idea, it lights up, but if you don't have an electrical system, it's never going to work. And having an electrical system is a massive disruption. So you've got to find a way of shifting there. So to adopt an invention, you need all that other stuff. the platform or the infrastructures or the systems.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I believe, if you're not obsessed with internet technology or software on a day-to-day basis, sometimes the things that people around here get excited about seem very trivial because they're developments on an existing platform. Some of it happens to be pretty innovative and new, but it's all happening on an existing platform, which you could call either internet, Wi-Fi, connectability through cell phone towers. And I wonder if the true innovations happen when, instead of thinking of innovation happening at mile markers for inventions, if we should look at them through platforms, that there's a certain series of platforms that happen, and those are the real sort of big leaps. The light bulb is really a platform for electricity, which might be more important than the light bulb itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, I think you wanted to say something. Yeah.
You inspired a thought. I don't
Yep.
know if you thought about it yourself, but in terms of a platform or an ecology for hot rods, wasn't it in the 40s or so that the transit system in LA got buried? 30s or 40s, LA had, just like New York and Chicago and the East Coast cities, they had a great transit system. They had trolleys running everywhere, so you didn't have to drive, right? You could take the trolley. But then that got buried. I forget who did that.
General Motors
or something like that. So you bury that, all of a sudden you have to start driving places, right? You have all these vets that were modifying Jeeps or whatever in the war zone, to keep them going, right? Now they're home, they've got stuff going, they have to drive, and you don't have that in the East Coast or in the Midwest. Is that possibly why the hot rod took off in the Los Angeles area? Because you had a need.
I like the idea of a platform killing another platform too. It shows how living and breathing they are, that for one to live, the other one might have to move or die.
You used a good word as well there, which is a kind of ecology. How these things connect together into mutually reinforcing, but also flawed systems. Yeah. Mm-hmm. You going to say something, Bill? Oh.
Sorry.
Well, I wanted to follow on Reilly's theme here about this, the hot rod and Bill Gates. I'm sorry, and that computer. And Michael, you had mentioned that the car industry kind of went stagnant for a period, like in the 20s actually, which it did, because cars were now established as a commodity that we were going to have. This is a given. But what changed then was something called the art and color section was established at General Motors.
What was that, sorry?
The art and color section.
Art and color section at General Motors.
That was when Sloan appointed Harley Earl in California.
He was a Stanford guy.
Sculpting the shapes of cars in clay.
Really?
As opposed to just engineering drawings. And this was a car for every person purpose. That's what the slogan was.
A car for every
purse and purpose.
Purse and purpose.
Right.
Okay, wow.
So we had the technology coming kind of stagnant, but then suddenly there was art and color and shape and form and fun called design.
Yeah.
Which can be compared to computers up to the point where everybody was starting to have them and know about them, and then suddenly there's iMac. Mm-hmm. And now we have this thing that's it's blue or it's green.
That's a great analogy. Yeah.
And you can't make the case that General Motors, the reason that General Motors is bigger than Ford was because of that innovation. And I've not read about that, but you American car guys here, is that not the case? The General's bigger because they did this styling stuff better in the 20s and the 30s, and then better in the post-war period as well.
Yeah, it's styling, it's escalation from one audience to move you from a Chevrolet to a Cadillac. Something that Henry Ford simply wasn't willing to do until General Motors had more market share.
By the 20s or 30s, the platform literally had been established, 2 steel rails, and the engine was going to be here. Before that wasn't established. It was in the 20s where all that was pretty much.
It's a great
the platform became, that's the formula.
I just want to go on a little bit of a tangent with the California of the innovation. It was after World War II, during World War II, they were building airplanes in Los Angeles. Right afterwards, they were doing dry lakes racing. So in the East, they didn't have race courses, whereas the hot runners had dry lakes. They had Saturday night blacktop races on back roads. And so it caused a lot of innovation because they had, for instance, belly tankers as streamliners. They had very cheap platforms in which to go fast. It's a great point in that time after World War II.
Yes, but.
We spent a lot of time talking about technology, innovation, politics, but we haven't talked about capital as it relates to the Valley. Trying to identify the drivers of success in the Valley. I encourage everyone to look at a movie called Something Venture. Maybe some of you have seen that, but a venture capitalist by the name of Ron Holland did this movie because he wanted to chronicle what drove successful innovation in the Valley. Starting, it's Apple, it's Intel, it's Genentech, it's Tandem, it's Cisco, it's about 10 companies. And the bottom line was, there was a great idea, there was a great team, but it took more than that. It took capital and it took leadership from the capital side. And the West Coast capitalists were much different from the East Coast capitalists. They operated differently, they were collaborative, they shared as they didn't do back east. But it gets to the heart of what kind of drove things. Basically, it was universities, Stanford and Cal. It was Professor Turman saying, hey, we could build an industrial park over there so we could be collaborative, people could walk and ride their bicycles back to the university. It was the willingness to take lots of risk and work together in partnership, kind of on the bleeding edge. See this movie and you'll see the real story of these companies, many of which you talked about earlier. It's wonderful. It's a documentary. It's won surprises here and there. And Something Venture. Buy it online, sure.
I think what we're unpacking here is, the kind of range of connections, the notion of an ecology, but also this is precisely a political economy, which is where you're looking at relationships that go through technology, absolutely, but then of course through corporations, companies, and their individuals, how they get on, how they connect, and indeed local, regional cultures, notoriously, the West Coast, California, and indeed Northern versus Southern California, and that it is a very human thing. Now there I want to pick up on something else that doesn't bug me, but I find interesting. What makes people want to hack? So you've got platforms, okay. So you've got a Model T, right? But it's been mass produced and it's part of, a major corporate adventure, let's call it that, in the 1920s. Is it that it just is there? Wow, this is cool. There's a platform. We can play with it. But why? Why hack a car? Using your terminology. When, you're not presumably doing it to make money, because Ford's doing that. And is it not the case that Ford are going to be wanting to encourage people to innovate because they're going to benefit from it? So why hack? Why do all that kind of stuff?
I think that's a really great question. I think that, well, certainly in the example of, let's say, the mail carrier who had the skis on the front of his Model T, I'm not sure if he purchased that as a kit or if he did that, but that is more of a, sort of a necessity as a mother of invention. There was more of a need for him to do his job. But I believe that innovation needs, it needs heroes and it needs failures, and you need people to lead the way a little bit. And in any ecosystem or platform, you have what we now call in the technology world early adopters, people who just love new stuff so much they're willing to experiment with a new thing, even though it might not be stable, might not have any longevity, but they're so interested in this type of work that they do it anyway. And those people serve a really important purpose, not because they're going to invent the thing that becomes the next big thing, but they provide enough of a model or a kernel for that next wave of people to come in and say, God, I didn't realize you could actually turn the engine upside down, you could do it like this or that. And so I believe it's getting back to the ecology point that you need a little bit of activity and then more people come in and et cetera, et cetera. But that is a question that I'd love for somebody to answer that, especially now, because why do, I know at Stanford a lot of students believe that they're entrepreneurs, even like when I talk to students all the time, in not just computer science students, but people who are sculpture artists, and you say, well, what do you do? And they'll say, oh, I'm an entrepreneur. And I think that right now there's some people who are motivated by money, some people are motivated by the identity of entrepreneurship. And in fact, some people, though, have been exposed to this new world because they never thought that they would either work on engines, develop software, build a company, but they've seen enough weird models happen that now they think that I can do that a little bit different or go a little bit further. And I'd love to figure out why they're doing that. That to me is utterly fascinating too. It's a great question.
I think it's curiosity.
Yeah.
I think a lot of us, we may not be engineers by profession, but when we see something working, we want to know how it works.
Yeah.
And when we have a pretty good understanding of how it works, we then start thinking about the next step. And maybe I change that bit there and it goes 10% faster. I think that's how the ball starts rolling. Mm-hmm. In the advances.
That's absolutely appropriate, I think, to get into the psychology and the motivations. The only thing, again, as a historian, is that it's not constant through history. There's not that constant we might think it's human. The evidence is that it's not. And maybe we do have different periods where, it is more attractive to follow your curiosity, or it's more motivating than at other times. Because this whole open source thing that, of course, we've seen, come along, and indeed all the talk and appropriate interest there is at the moment in open source, yes, but also crowdsourcing, and the notion of collaborative work, and indeed notions of clusters of innovators like in the Valley. It's all about these connections that are going on. But it's not just a simple case of, oh, we're all curious, let's share it. Because there are winners and losers. What we've mentioned in a previous class as well is another kind of hacking movement, which is the maker movement, which is intriguing because they're taking, platforms, or they're developing platforms, in typically, not untypically in high tech, but it's all about customization and making it your own, and moving out away from, the consumer world into something that you make yourself. In which case, that curiosity is tied to self-realization. Now, we had a bit of something there about, coming back from the Second World War and experiences you've had there of being at an edge and not just surviving, but even indeed prospering. And then you come home and it's not there anymore, and you're in a different kind of world, but you pursue that experience. And maybe, there's something about, a globalized corporate culture. Somebody else commented about, I'd love a car that I could customize. Not necessarily tinker with, but make it mine. And you talk, Reilly, about, wow, that's big, different, hard. Especially when you got corporations who want to, keep things safe and regulated, because otherwise they're going to get sued, fined, they're going to be liable for all sorts of things when you fiddle with their cars. But the impulse, self-realization, would that work? Is that what's going on? Yeah.
Well, I just wonder, it seems to me that for one thing, this seems to be more of a male thing. I'm not sure why. But also, I think there's an element of creative destruction that people like to break things and see how they can damage things. And not everyone, but I think there's an element of that in that kind of culture, that they're just saying, well, what happens if we do this, or we create these things where we can send these robot cars out, we can shoot at them in the desert, or various, that there's a kind of mentality, and I'm sure it's not widespread, but that actually is part of that movement because they're doing their thing that's, I guess, self-actualization, but it's kind of a destructive thing, but they're actually creating things at the same time.
Yes.
How unique is this? I mean, aren't there hobbyists in just about every field of human endeavor? People who are tinkering and customizing and playing with and developing their own specialties and innovations, whether they become broadly spread throughout the culture or not. There are always people doing, always hobbyists tinkering with things.
In the D School, when we're doing our ethnographic research into needs and wants and desires that are design actionable, we have a category of person. We don't call them hobbyists, but they're extreme users. Extreme users who either despise everything to do with this particular field, whatever it might be, cars or whatever, and others who are absolutely obsessed with it and go to extremes. And they're very, very interesting categories because they give you insights into what the majority are kind of playing around, And so, because I think the notion of a hobby is an interesting one because it's absolutely defined. I think it's part of a modern attitude towards, work, labor, fiddling with things, tinkering with things. And it's a kind of leisure thing as opposed to work. It's satisfying work because, typically your work isn't necessarily so satisfying. But I think the notion of an extreme user, well, it seems to be, it's very, very widespread.
So is the hot rod the extreme user coming towards the mainstream? Is the hot rodder in Southern California in the 50s and the 60s, is that the extreme user coming towards the mainstream?
It's a good question. In terms, again, of the history of style, a long-term view, style, runs in cycles. I think you mentioned the sine curve, the bell curve. So commonly found in style and culture and the arts, where you have, early adopters, who are rare, less than, they're minority, they're extreme users. And then, you see wider and wider adoption, typically through emulation. You want to be like them, you see the advances or whatever of it, so you take it on board. And then you get others who think, oh, it's not so cool now. And so they start looking around for other ways of self-definition and adopting maybe other extremes. So you get these bell curves of things being adopted and then falling off. And that's a regular pattern through most of human history. And again, it implies extreme users. So hot rod, you can look for extremes with a view to thinking, hey, that could well be the mainstream in N number of years. Mm-hmm. Yes?
Simple question. When did gasoline stations come about?
That's a great question.
Because the infrastructure, having that infrastructure then becomes a springboard for all this other work and innovation coming about. And that's how I see it. I don't know when it came about. I don't know how it fits into the curve that you had showed us of different inflection points.
I think it's really important. I don't know the answer to that. I'm sure there's a year where you have saturation across the country or in these big centers. Don't have an answer, but I should look into that. I don't know. It's a great question.
Yeah, because how is the growth of that?
Fueled literally by that.
Literally fueled.
Right.
In the same vein, in the same vein, I was thinking about the rubber. It used to be extracted from trees and then it became synthetic. It's the same idea, the materials to do whatever you want to do with the platform.
Yeah.
Again, it's these connections, these ecologies. Yeah.
I was going to say we maybe don't really have a clear answer right now on when gasoline came out, but we can really see when electric charging stations are coming out. So that can give us a picture of what happened then, how is it going to happen in the future. And there's already crazy innovations in electric charging stations. Like there's the ones that you have to charge in your car or in your garage overnight, and now they come up with really fast ones that work in 45 minutes. And so you can see there's at least some degree, someone is clearly hacking in that regard and trying to find ways to make that process work the same way a gas station does.
And there are passive charging systems now being developed where the road and the highway itself recharges your batteries.
there was one hacker at the EAA a few years ago. I remember him wanting to drive into downtown San Jose where they have the 660 overhead for the trolleys and tap into the 660.
Extreme users.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's photographs of Harvey Firestone for the tires, and Thomas Edison, Henry Ford. I think there are buddies.
At a campfire, yeah. They used to vacation together. Yep.
Yeah.
And you might have had who did Standard Oil?
Rockefeller.
Yeah.
So you might investigate through Rockefeller whether this company owned Standard Oils that were providing those stations, or whether it was independent entrepreneurs.
It's very interesting that they're all right around the Great Lakes there.
We talked about car Benz and the inventing of the car. What I'm about to say came from the Daimler-Benz Museum, so it may or may not be true, but in the Daimler-Benz Museum, what they say is that Benz and Daimler never met, but they lived within 60 kilometers of each other. And in 1885, Benz, using some money from his wife's family, and really with her encouragement, set out to build the first purpose-powered vehicle. And what he built had 3 wheels and it had a single-cylinder internal combustion engine, and that's considered the first car. But at the same time, Daimler, who ran a technical school in Stuttgart, had a star pupil, Maybach, and had bought for his wife a carriage. And instead of giving it to his wife for her birthday, the carriage, he instead gave it to Maybach and had Maybach install this 4-stroke single-cylinder engine which he had developed into the carriage. So you have these 2 vehicles that were invented at about the same time, very close together, and Benz is credited with being the inventor of the car. And this is interesting, it's what made me think of it, because of the patents. Because Bertha had insisted that Carl go and take out patents. And similarly, the reason that he's considered, you know, she made a big deal over the first drive. So there's this famous drive where she drove out of Stuttgart to visit her family home in the countryside. And it was all this amazing marketing exercise driven by her. She went with her 2 sons, and every time the car broke down, they just got off and pushed. It didn't matter. The story was that a woman had driven from Stuttgart to this country house, and the vision of personal mobility was born. And what I think is interesting about that is that Daimler didn't even see that as being in the same realm, because the 3-pointed star by land, sea and air, he wanted to create the motive power, the engines for ships, for aeroplanes, for all these different types of transportation. So I just think it's interesting that it's the patent that drives it, and also that these things sort of came along together. It wasn't that Benz was some incredible innovator, inventor. He more was an innovator of existing technologies, which if these 2 guys had developed it surely the technology had to be pretty commonplace. It was just the way that these 2 guys packaged it made it special.
Yeah, there's a theory that one of my friends, Dr. David Laramie, lives in Los Angeles, and he believes in this theory of morphic thoughts he's been telling me about. And essentially it means you can have these 2 things happening at the same time or around the same time, and these people don't necessarily need to talk to one another as we know talking, but that there's a certain level of communication going on within the spirit of the culture. So we might call this, it's in the zeitgeist, or in this new phrase, there's a morphic thought about this type of development. And some of it is that these people both read articles 12 years ago that talked about this type of power, and they both have had experiences with their horses, and they both wanted to travel more than 20 miles in a day, and they both wanted to do these things, and so that's the real genesis or the ingredients for these morphic thoughts. And I'm starting to believe in it more. Maybe it means I've been living in California for too long. But I believe it's the case because, and you can probably speak to this, that things happen on other sides of the world, and there's something that speaks to the inventor in one place and another place, and they haven't spoke with one another, and it's just fascinating. I don't know why that happens.
It's a great way. I've got to respect time. It's a great way to end floating away on morphic thoughts. Let's take that away with us. Wonderful. Thank you, Reilly.
Yep. Thank you.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.